House Republicans are a curious combination of dismayed and increasingly deranged after a week of back-to-back-to-back humiliations. First, Hunter Biden called their bluff. Second, they expelled George Santos, shrinking their very narrow majority further. And then three, just their general lack of meaningful gains against President Biden and the Democrats. And that despair and derangement is spilling over not only in the media, but also on the floor of the House of Representatives. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, we have several clips to play. I just want to say, again, this is great. We need to enjoy this while it lasts because it's entirely possible it won't last forever. Historically speaking, the Republican Party has been much more inclined to set aside like internal divisions and like points of disagreement to mobilize for the greater good. Obviously, it's not for the greater good, but for their greater political good. Whereas Democrats, historically speaking, in the left, because it's much more it's much more disparate, right? You're talking about the Big Ten party. They've been much more inclined to trip over themselves and engage in what President Obama referred to as the circular firing squad. But here lately, for the past couple of years, those roles have flipped, right? It's Democrats in the House and in the Senate, for the most part, who've gotten their act together. And the Republican Party, which is just, tripping over themselves and stepping on rakes. And it's great. When Republicans are in disarray, that's best for the American people. But anyway, I want to start with this clip. It's the least recent from about a week or so ago. It's a clip from an interview between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Don Jr., in which she just basically summarizes the entire theme of what's going on here.
Our party sucks. I totally feel that way. And guess what? Our voters feel that way. And that means that we're in trouble. Don, I wrote this book because I wanted people.
We have no time for her book. I'm not entirely convinced she wrote one in the first place. I've just seen a cover. It's not doing well in terms of sales and reviews, so I'm convinced it's just nothing but blank sheets in between. Now, that aside, we have Chip Roy, who's also, when it comes to Democratic advertising, is kind of the gift that keeps on giving. He's a Republican congressman from Texas, and he's fed up. Either performatively or sincerely, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is actually a lot of what he's saying is true. He's very fed up with the Republican Party, and he's complaining that there have been no meaningful gains. And he did this a couple of weeks ago, and then he did it again within the past 36 hours, and that's what these clips are from, prompting a really interesting exchange between him and his fellow Republican, Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. So let's watch these clips, and then we'll unpack them together.
We have done a number of great things fighting here as Republicans, but they don't mean a thing if we are not willing to sit down at the negotiation table and look at our Democratic colleagues in the Senate and look at the President of the United States and tell him this is how it's going to be done, or you're not going to get your funding. This is how it's going to be done, or don't even think about another dollar for Ukraine. That's my message to my Republican colleagues who, frankly, are getting a little too wound up at that question I asked, what have we done? Because the simplest solution to your frustration about that question being asked is to have an answer. And so to my friend from Pennsylvania, I wonder if he might agree.
So I will say before we play the next clip of Chip Roy ranting and then Scott Perry comes in at the end in the third clip, it is a bit naive to assume that House Republicans with a razor-thin majority in one chamber of Congress is going to be dictating terms of negotiation with a very, close neck-and-neck House minority, and then a Senate Democratic majority, and then a Democratic president. It's hard to believe that you'll be the tail that wags the dog. Now you have, again, the second part of Chip Roy's rant, and then Scott Perry comes in at the next clip we're going to play.
Question is, what are we going to do about it? Right? I mean, I think that's the fundamental question. Did your constituents send you here to file bills, to file amendments, to simply vote and then go say, oh, isn't it so great that we voted and passed something out of committee? Do your constituents know when we pass something out of committee as a general matter? Do they know how many bills you filed? Do they know whether or not you got some amendment inserted, whatever, unless you tell them? Or are they looking for results? Do they want the border to actually be secured? Do they want spending to actually go down so there's less inflation and they can afford to live? Do they want us to have a military that's focused rather than woke? Do they want us to deliver results, or do they just want us to sit up here and pound our chest at how we got certain bills introduced and I got some vote on some measure on the floor of the House.
Now, obviously, like especially the stuff about the military, the idea that the United States military is any less formidable in terms of its capacity to destroy things now than it ever was is ridiculous. We have the most powerful military on Earth now and in the history of civilization. And that's not to say that there aren't serious problems with the Pentagon. We spend entirely too much on defense in this country. I understand wanting to maintain a military edge, but we spend more than like the next 12 or 13 countries combined, most of which are allies. And by the way, the Pentagon fails audit after audit after audit after audit, so it's not exactly like they're the beacons of fiscal responsibility. That aside, now comes in Scott Perry to kind of shore up what Chip Roy is talking about.
No, they don't understand why. What they demand to the good gentleman from Texas is results, is some product. They don't care about why it can't be done. And they're not asking for everything to change overnight. They know we didn't get here overnight, but they want something, some win. Show them some light at the end of this tunnel. But there isn't any. I haven't seen one yet.
Well, that's because you all consciously, out of sheer spite and partisan politics, went to the end of the tunnel and you bricked it up. I mean, it's your fault. You know, Scott Perry and Chip Roy are saying, not completely, but they are saying true things. But a lot of that is their responsibility too. They have allowed the party and contributed to the party becoming, you know, much more interested in BS culture war nonsense than delivering results for the American people, which is why they go out of their way to obstruct the president's agenda, which is overwhelmingly popular and would benefit not only progressives and minority groups and marginalized groups, but also Republican constituencies as well. But they hate the President Biden and the Democrats much more than they love their own country. Now, then you have Matt Gaetz, who voices a different angle of this. He talks about, you know, again, the House majority, which was, you know, very narrow to begin with the expulsion of George Santos. They have even less leverage now than they did to begin with.
And our willingness to self-mutilate on these things really impairs our ability to get the job done. So let's do the math here, Charlie. We have a 4-vote majority, right? Now we've kicked out George Santos. We have a 3-vote majority. Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio has taken a college university presidency. That could knock us down to 2. And I don't really think Kevin McCarthy's sticking around long. Every image of his office shows that he's packing things up in boxes. So we could be down to a 1-seat majority. We got a bunch of these octogenarians in our conference. If, God forbid, any of them were to cross the Rainbow Bridge, we would be in a situation where we could literally lose the majority because we were so eager to throw George Santos out before even being convicted. It is not in accordance with precedent. It is not in accordance with due process. And it is just tactically freaking stupid.
Well, I certainly won't challenge him on the idea that outside of like just low cunning, that the Republican Party is indeed stupid with respect to their elected officials. No doubt about that. But I just love the standard. Like, he's not defending George Santos. He's like, listen, we should absolutely tolerate his abject corruption because it puts us in a politically disadvantageous position not to. What's interesting is his fellow, you know, anti-McCarthy Republican Nancy Mace kind of said something similar. She said, George Santos is an ass who, like every American, deserves the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. Charges are not conviction, okay? And as our buddy Luke Beasley pointed out, so you think it's wrong to remove one elected official from office, Santos, without a criminal conviction, but are eagerly trying to remove another elected official from office, the president, also without a criminal conviction. Make it make sense, Nancy. And he's right? So this is not, George Santos was not convicted of anything by the House. It wasn't a criminal proceeding. He is still entitled to the presumption of innocence in terms of his engagement with the Justice Department, which does involve, you know, matters of criminal law. He was just kicked out of Congress, and you're not entitled to serve in Congress unless you have some sort of criminal conviction. That's not the standard. It's not necessarily the standard. It's not obligated to be the standard. And if it is the standard, then you guys should just pack up the impeachment of President Biden, because President Biden hasn't been criminally indicted, and you certainly don't have a criminal conviction. So if it's wrong for you to remove one elected official without some sort of criminal conviction, shouldn't it be wrong for you to try to remove the other elected official without a criminal conviction? But of course, no, they don't care. It's just the double standard. They'll do and say whatever they want to hurt Democrats and also advantage their own. Now, when it comes to kicking President Biden out of office with the impeachment, That's all of it. That's not going well either. So Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, has said he has a foot in both worlds. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, he's recently publicly said, I enthusiastically support the good work that the impeachment inquiry is doing with respect to investigating the president. And then he told a group of House Republican moderates, people who live in President Biden, districts President Biden won, 18 of them, as a matter of fact, he told them they really don't have any evidence to proceed with a formal impeachment, so don't worry about it. And that presumably pissed off, or did actually, not presumably, we talked about it. It pissed off the MAGA Republicans who were like, Mike Johnson's doing what Kevin McCarthy did. He's playing both sides. And now Mike Johnson's signaling that a vote on the Biden impeachment inquiry is a necessary step after the White House has stonewalled GOP investigations. Because what you have to remember is Kevin McCarthy announced the impeachment inquiry into President Biden without taking a full vote of the House of Representatives, which Kevin McCarthy said when Democrats impeached Donald Trump was a necessary step, that if you have to vote on it before you begin an impeachment inquiry, let alone an impeachment, right, to legitimize the process. And then, of course, Republicans betray their own standard. So now Johnson's saying, well, actually, we probably need to go back and do that because the White House is stonewalling the investigations. Now, the White House has actually taken a different position, saying, listen, not only have we not stonewalled you, we've given you basically everything you've asked for. And as a matter of fact, your people have bragged that you've gotten everything you've wanted out of the White House. So they sent this memo out citing evidence. Oversight Committee James Comer has bragged on TV that he has received 100% of what we've requested, and even said that we're in the downhill phase of this investigation now because we have so many documents, okay? And so far, the Biden administration has largely cooperated with the House GOP's various oversight efforts, according to the Washington Post. And then it breaks it down what they've offered the House Republicans. 35,000 pages of private financial records, 2,000 pages of Treasury Department financial reports, yada, 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 yada. Thousands of vice presidential era records released by the National Archives. It's like, well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that you're being stonewalled when you've also bragged about getting everything you wanted. Which one is it? And I'll be honest with you, I think that the Democrats probably should have stonewalled. I mean, Donald Trump did when he was in the White House over infinitely more meritorious impeachment attempts. Why on earth are Democrats obligated to play by different rules than Republicans? I think we should revisit that. Now, the last clip I want to play here, it concerns the impeachment itself. It's a second part of that interview between Charlie Kirk and Matt Gaetz. And this is what Matt Gaetz has to say with respect to impeachment prospects.
Any hope in the next couple weeks to get an impeachment of Mayorkas, Garland, or Joe Biden?
We don't have the votes to impeach anyone. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is actually showcasing that by forcing votes on impeachment, by filing these privileged resolutions. And frankly, we've got a lot of these moderate members who just don't have the gumption to advance impeachment.
So there you go. I mean, things could change. I don't want to bet the farm that they can't get the votes to impeach the president. It does seem incredibly unlikely. I don't know if they have the votes to formalize the impeachment inquiry, though some reporting suggests that some of the moderate Republicans in those Biden districts, and I say moderate, I should put air quote, are leaning in that direction. But I'm not entirely convinced on that, let alone an impeachment. Even if they got the votes for impeachment, it would die an ugly death in the Senate. So I don't know. The bottom line is the GOP, in terms, especially in the House, in the Senate too, but really in the House, it's a clown show, folks. This is a party that is not fit or capable of responsible governing. And as we head into an election year, everybody should remember that. Let me know what you think in the comments.